In September last year, this committee explored the issue of attacks by members of the Afghan National Security Forces on U.S. and coalition personnel. The witnesses concluded that the DoD had mitigated the risk about to the degree we can in these few occasions when such attacks have occurred. Since then, the committee staff has continued to look into the factors behind attacks by Afghan nationals on coalition forces, including attacks conducted by Afghans hired by private security contractors to protect U.S. bases. The staff has used the attack in March 2011 at Forward Operating Base Frontenac as a case study to better understand the range of issues. In that attack, 2 soldiers died, including my constituent, Specialist Rudy Acosta, and 4 were wounded. I would like to note that Specialist Acosta's father and mother, Dante and Carolyn Acosta, are with us here today. Private security contractors are used in Afghanistan to provide personal protective services for Department of State personnel and dignitaries, to guard construction sites, to ensure safe movement for other private companies doing business in Afghanistan, for guarding supply convoys, and to augment coalition forces by providing base security. In the case of base security, the Commander-in-Chief is responsible for determining the size of the U.S. force deployed to Afghanistan and other places around the world, the missions that the force will undertake, and the necessary contractor support. For different reasons, both President Bush and President Obama have chosen to limit the size of the U.S. force and to use private security contractors to enhance base security. In contrast, it is Congress's role and the purpose of today's hearing to assess the advisability of these policies and whether the administration needs to change its approach. Complicating matters further, President Karzai has dictated that only Afghan nationals may be certified for employment as private security guards and has not permitted U.S. citizen contractors. Karzai has also ordered the private security contractors to be disbanded. The Afghan Ministry of Interior will assume full responsibility for providing the Afghan Personal Protection Force, a new organization that from March 2012 onward, with a few exceptions, will replace private security contractors. The APPF will be available on a fee-for-service basis to coalition forces to perform the services that I just described. According to the DoD, the Afghan Ministry of Interior, in conjunction with U.S. and coalition forces, will use a vetting and screening process that will be the same for both the Afghan National Security Forces and the APPF. I recognize that it would be virtually impossible to establish a foolproof screening process. Our own national security screening system is not foolproof. Yet we must recognize that the existing processes failed to identify 42 attackers from 2007 to 2011. 39 of those attacks were by members of the Afghan National Security Force and 3 by contractor employees. Though less than 1% of Afghan forces and security guards have attacked coalition forces, this is 42 attacks too many, and the new process must do better. Another concern is that the screening and vetting has been tragically weak in picking up signs of threats after the Afghan joined either the Afghan National Security Force or a private security contractor. DoD data indicates that at least 60% of all the attacks appear to be motivated by personal matters arising after the hiring. So it was with the attacker at FOB Frontenac. In July 2010, at another forward operating base, his employer, Tundra Security, fired him for allegedly making statements about killing U.S. personnel and recommended that he not be rehired. The contractor's chain of command did not enter that recommendation into the attacker's file, and the attacker was rehired by the same contractor in 2011, just before the attack at Frontenac. Moreover, because a parallel U.S. investigation of the 2010 allegations concluded that the statements could not be substantiated, the U.S. official at the base decided not to enter the allegations about the attacker in the U.S. watch list system. Adding to my concern about the vetting system not being focused in the right place, a U.S. rescreening of all Afghan security guards at Frontenac immediately after the attack resulted in several being dismissed as unworthy of employment. Finally, I'm concerned about the Department's September statement that its efforts have mitigated the risk about to the degree we can. At the time, the committee was not aware that the frequency of these attacks had dramatically increased in 2010 and 2011. In fact, 75% of all attacks have occurred in the last 2 years. The Department attributes the increase with the growth of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. But we need to understand the contributing factors better so that more effective steps can be taken to further mitigate attacks on U.S. and coalition personnel. Before introducing our witnesses, I would like to read Mr. Acosta's statement into the record. This was written on Wednesday, February 1st, 2012. Last month, we received the U.S. Army AR-15-6 report regarding the March 19, 2011 attack on U.S. Army FOB Frontenac, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, which resulted in the death of our son, Specialist Rudy A. Acosta, and Corporal Donald Mickler, and the wounding of 4 other soldiers. The report highlighted the fact that although the U.S. government allows private security contractors to provide base security in hostile lands, basic levels of safeguards were either not implemented or not followed. This allowed an Afghan national who made prior threats against U.S. troops to be reemployed by PSC Tundra Security and carry out a lethal attack. Our family and the nation believe that this practice should be ended and rules be put in place so that only U.S. troops guard U.S. troops on these posts. However, as long as this practice continues, these PSCs, like Tundra, must follow rules put in place to safeguard our troops, and there must be consequences if they fail to do so. We are disappointed that we were not allowed to testify in person before the House Armed Services Committee on this critical issue. End quote. I would also inform members that some of the material provided to the committee is classified. The classified items are noted in the hearing memo. If any member wishes to discuss classified matters after the hearing, our witnesses have agreed to make themselves available in 2337 immediately following this hearing. If any member wishes to go to 2337 for this classified material, please let the committee staff know before our hearing ends today. Ranking Member Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the Chairman for having this hearing and, most importantly, for his attention to this issue. I know this has been a huge priority for you and the majority staff and for this full committee, and I appreciate all of the work on it because it is a critically important issue. As you look at the report and see the disturbing number of attacks committed by ANSF and Afghan contractors against our troops, it is indeed a very serious and troubling situation. Our troops are in Afghanistan to protect the Afghan people and to protect their government. To be turned on by the very people they're fighting with and for undermines the entire operation and places our troops at an unacceptable level of risk. Now, I think there's been a thorough study of this, but I think it's also clear that we can do more. More not just in the initial screening process determining who is going to be in proximity to our troops, armed and in a position to cause harm, but even after they are hired, after they've gone through the screening and vetting situation, to continue to monitor for problems and err on the side of interceding sooner rather than later. that if we are not sure if someone is 100% with us and safe, then need to go find them a different job without a gun so close in proximity to our troops and soldiers that places them at risk. Clearly, there is more screening that can be done and more protection that can be done as we learn more about what motivated these attacks and hopefully learn and see where those attacks come from. Certainly some of them have been infiltration from the Taliban, and we need to make sure we do a better job of screening initially, but a lot of them simply come down to personal matters that arise during the course of their service, but these are things that can be seen by those who are observing. We need to keep a much keener eye for Afghan national security forces and Afghan contractors who may become a problem and intervene, find ways to protect our troops and put that ANSF soldier who may be a problem in a place where they don't have the proximity to do this kind of harm. So I look forward to the testimony to hear more about what we can do to better protect our troops from these kinds of attacks. And again, I want to thank Mr. McKeon especially for his attention to this issue and for the work. It's a critically important issue to protect our troops and a major problem right now in Afghanistan. I look forward to working with our witnesses in the committee to find solutions to better protect our troops in Afghanistan. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Our witnesses today are Mr. David S. Sedney, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia from the Department of Defense, and Mr. Gary J. Motzek, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Program Support, Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics from the Department of Defense, Brigadier General Stephen Townsend, U.S. Army, Director, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Coordination Cell, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Brigadier General Kenneth Dahl, U.S. Army, Deputy Commander General for Support, 10th Mountain Division, Fort Drum, New York. General Dahl, since you directed the AR-15-6 investigation into the attack at FOB Frontenac, we'd like you to begin, and then we'll just move down the row. Thank you.
Chairman McKeon, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of the committee, it's an honor to appear before you. I welcome the opportunity to contribute to your understanding of the events that took place at FOB Frontenac, and I appreciate your oversight of our operations in general. I'd like to begin by once again expressing my condolences to the families of the brave soldiers that we lost, and to honor the sacrifices of all servicemen and women and their families from whom we continue to ask so much. I'm aware that you've previously been provided a full, unredacted version of the Army investigation conducted under Army Regulation 15-6. I am confident that I will be able to cover the key findings and recommendations of that investigation in this open session. While serving in Regional Command South in Afghanistan, I appointed an officer to investigate the circumstances of the 19 March 2011 attack on FOB Frontenac. In addition to the standard scope of an investigation for any incident resulting in the death of a soldier, we directed this investigation to also specifically consider the role of the security contractor, in this case Tundra, the vetting process to hire local Afghans, and to make recommendations to improve our processes and prevent similar incidents in the future. The challenges identified in the investigation are complex, and the implementation of those recommendations is deliberate and is ongoing. The investigation identified the assailant, a Tundra employee, as an insurgent who infiltrated the ranks of Tundra in order to execute an internal attack. The attack resulted in the tragic deaths of 2 great soldiers and the injury of 4 others. Due to the quick actions of 2 well-trained soldiers and the excellent response of medical personnel on the scene, the unit did mitigate the impact of this attack and prevented greater casualties. A key finding of the investigation was that the assailant had indeed been fired months prior for making unsubstantiated threats against U.S. soldiers at a FOB in a different location. Given that the threats were unsubstantiated, neither Tundra nor the command annotated those threats in an official record, which, had they been recorded, may have prevented the assailant from being rehired. Additionally, the investigation revealed that the command found the orders and policies governing the personal security contractor vetting and hiring of those to be vague and confusing. The recommendations from this investigation focused on clarifying pertinent guidance, creating a comprehensive background file for all local Afghan contract hires, and sharing the findings at all levels of the formation and throughout the chain of command to increase awareness and prevent similar incidents in the future. I will point out that the investigation also made specific recommendations to recognize the courage and quick action of those soldiers who responded to the attack. The attack on FOB Frontenac was a tragic event. All commanders take very seriously their responsibility to protect our soldiers. We have taken steps to correct the errors in process and the confusing policies identified in the investigation, but sadly in this case these corrections would likely not have altered the outcome. Nonetheless, it is our duty to explore every avenue to protect our soldiers, and we welcome your leadership and the oversight of this committee, which causes us to examine ourselves and find ways to improve our operations. Thank you.
General Townsend.
Chairman McKeon, Ranking Member Smith, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you today about our efforts to assist the Afghan National Security Forces in ensuring their ranks are free from those who might seek to harm our troops who are fighting alongside them to build an Afghanistan that will never again be a safe haven for terrorists. First, let me add my personal condolences to General Dawes for the family of the troopers who lost their lives at FOB Frontenac. Like the Acosta family who are here today, I'd like to thank them publicly for their son's service and their family's sacrifice. And to the families of all of our troops, both U.S. and allies, who have been killed or injured in other unfortunate attacks like this one during our mission in Afghanistan. Our bottom line up front is a protection of service members deployed in harm's way against any threat remains one of our highest priorities for our commanders and leaders both here in Washington and in the field. Although there is no such thing as perfect protection, especially in Afghanistan, we know we must continue to develop effective ways to combat the insider threat to our service members. To that end, we appreciate this committee's support in exploring the best methods to provide security for Americans and our allies doing the nation's work in Afghanistan. As this committee is well aware, our efforts in Afghanistan have not been without great sacrifice. We still face a very determined enemy who uses asymmetric methods to harm our troops, including insider attacks. A major focus of our military campaign is developing an increasingly self-reliant Afghan National Security Force that can lead the fight in the near future. We are working closely with Afghan leaders to reduce potential insider threats through a layered system that includes screening and vetting before an Afghan enters service, cultural training for Afghan service members, and growing an Afghan counterintelligence capability so they can detect potential insider threats before they come to fruition. For our part, we're reinforcing the importance of cultural and language training prior to deployment for our forces, emphasizing the importance of our own conduct each day in reducing unnecessary frictions with our partners, reviewing our own counterintelligence efforts in theater, and finally, reminding our leaders and soldiers they must always have their own protection foremost in their minds and ultimately provide their own security. One important part of this approach involves an 8-step vetting process that uses both Afghan cultural practices, such as recommendations from village elders, as well as modern technology in the form of biometrics, to help screen and vet Afghans before they enter service. Looking ahead to the transition of private security contractors to the Afghan Public Protection Force, we will see Afghan security guards undergoing a vetting process like this one. In these brief remarks, I've highlighted some of the efforts to address potential insider threats. As our campaign increasingly transitions security lead to the Afghans, and as our role shifts from leading combat operations to a primary focus on security assistance, our military personnel will be increasingly employed as embedded trainers and advisors with Afghan units. While we can't completely eliminate the potential for insider threats, we can greatly reduce them by using a multi-layered approach that includes smart vetting procedures, cultural training, leader and soldier force protection awareness, and counterintelligence efforts. Again, thank you for your continuous support to our men and women in uniform.
Thank you, Mr. Motzek.
Chairman McKeon, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the use of Afghan nationals to provide security to U.S. forces in light of the attack at the on U.S. personnel at Forward Operating Base Frontenac. I, too, would also like to extend my condolences to the families of our soldiers and, by extension, to all family members who have lost their lives and loved ones. Their deaths are all tragic. Generally speaking, contractors perform well and provide essential support to the conduct of our operations within Afghanistan. Without them, under the present conditions there, we would have to divert approximately 20,000 troops from essential combat tasks to perform non-combat related security functions, and our allies in Afghanistan are in a similar situation. In other words, we would have to move 30% of our force, whose primary mission is to offensively engage the enemies of our nation and are equipped and trained for that mission, to provide basic security services oriented primarily, frankly, against criminal elements. The investigation has clearly shown that although our basic policies are sound, there were weaknesses in execution, and we will continue to address these. DoD has a broad range of management policies and operational procedures to provide and achieve more effective oversight and coordination of contractor operations. Our oversight and responsibilities are not static but constantly evolve as we apply insights from lessons learned. For example, regarding PSCs, and when we first appeared before this committee regarding the oversight of PSCs, we have gone from a basic memorandum of agreement and the interagency process to a formal DoD instruction. We are now in the Code of Federal Regulations, and we're about to finalize an American Standards Institute standard on management and quality. And we will trust that will yield eventually an international standard that we can adopt internationally. DoD policy requires all contractor personnel, regardless of nationality, to comply with DoD regulations as well as the applicable laws of the United States and the host country. Biometrics are now an integral part of that oversight and vetting process. Incidents that involve local nationals attacking U.S. forces or allies are unacceptable, and we must do all we can to eliminate or minimize those risks. Frankly, as the chairman and the ranking member has said, I don't believe we can actually fully eliminate them, but we must do everything in our power to minimize them. Because our national objectives in Afghanistan include that our forces work side by side with those of the host nation. I assure you we will continue to assess our procedures and operations to minimize those risks and to prove where we can find and identify shortfalls. There is no end state to the way we review and implement our processes. Again, the incident at FOB Frontenac was an obvious tragedy, and no investigation or hearing can minimize or relieve that loss. Hopefully this testimony provides a documentary baseline of the topics we were asked to address during this hearing, and as my fellow witnesses, we're prepared to address your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sidney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Smith, distinguished members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I particularly thank you for your continued support for our troops. It's important in this hearing, and as we discuss Afghanistan, that we focus on why the United States is in Afghanistan. We are there to ensure that Afghanistan is never again used by our enemies to attack the United States. Our core goal is to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda and prevent Afghanistan from again becoming a safe haven for such attacks. This is a mission that I know our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines understand. Their efforts and sacrifices allow the rest of us to enjoy the benefits of freedom that our military is dedicated to uphold. The conflict in Afghanistan has and remains a tough war in very difficult circumstances. However, our military has proven immensely adaptable as it has found ways to address those challenges, particularly in the past 3 years. The changes in the way we fight and partner with the Afghans is key to the success we are having. 3 years ago, we submitted a report to Congress, the 1230 report, saying essentially that we were losing in Afghanistan. Our most recent report demonstrates that clearly the momentum has shifted to our side and the Taliban are on their back foot. Violence continues to decrease, largely due to our close partnership with the Afghans and the Afghan security forces. The more the Afghans take the lead, the less effective the Taliban are. To a certain extent, increased partnership may place our force at greater risk, particularly as the Taliban recognize the importance of that partnership and actively attempt to counter it. But partnership also decreases the risk and decreases the need for U.S. and coalition forces to be in Afghanistan over the long term as we move towards on transitioning to Afghan lead and protecting their own country. I would like to add my sincere and personal condolences to the families of the servicemen who lost their lives or been wounded in the support of these goals, and particularly I offer condolences to the Mickler and Acosta family and their colleagues for this incident. Every loss of life is a tragedy, and our military and defense personnel work hard to prevent these incidents and protect our forces. We also constantly look for ways to learn from past events to prevent further tragedies. The issue that we're discussing today, that of the insider threat, is larger than this instance of private security personnel killing U.S. service members. In the combat zone that is Afghanistan, similar incidents of violence have occurred, including Afghans attacking our allies, Afghan security forces attacking each other, and Afghan security forces attacking civilians. Every event in itself is tragic, and we are working with our allies and partners in Afghanistan and our Afghan partners in order to try to prevent them. Incidents such as what happened at FOB Frontenac are truly tragic. And as the chairman pointed out, there has been an increase in attacks over the past year, at the same time as we have surged coalition forces and surged the number of Afghan security forces over the last 3 years. During that time, both our forces, our coalition allies, and Afghan security forces have suffered casualties, and I would add that the number of casualties that we have suffered and our allies have suffered and our Afghan allies have suffered is an evidence of the commitment to that core goal that I mentioned before that is shared by all who are involved. Not all of the insider threat attacks, of course, were caused by insurgent infiltration. In fact, as the chairman mentioned, our studies have shown that the majority are due to other circumstances. Personal issues, combat stress, and other factors, some of which we don't fully understand in every individual case, often underlie these attacks. Combat stress that leads to use of violence by forces against their colleagues and their partners is something that is an unfortunate characteristic of war everywhere and something that we must do everything we can to prevent in Afghanistan and elsewhere. However, I want to stress again that partnership with the Afghan security forces is a critical part of our strategy, and that is what is allowing us to make progress in Afghanistan, what is allowing us to have the prospect of transition to Afghan security lead. We are now in a position where half of the population of Afghanistan is in areas and provinces that are transitioning to Afghan security lead, and the capabilities that they've been able to build through this increased partnership is what is allowing that to happen and allowing the United States, as President Obama has already done, to reduce our presence in Afghanistan by 10,000 forces over the past year. We have also seen that the attacks on U.S. and our coalition allies by Afghan forces are more likely to happen where there's limited interaction between Afghans and U.S. and coalition forces. Where there is closer partnership, better interaction understanding, better mentoring, it is less likely that such an attack will occur. We continually to look at the lessons that we are learning from these tragedies, both the one at FOB Frontenac and more recent ones, to find ways to prevent future ones. In order to do that, we have to work together with our Afghan colleagues. As the chairman pointed out in his opening statement, the vetting process for both the Afghan security forces and the follow-on to the security companies of the Afghan Public Protection Force is using vetting methods that we have developed. It is important that those vetting methods, both the initial vetting and, as the ranking member mentioned, continued vetting once the forces are in place, are improved in order to prevent these incidents of friendly forces attack on friendly forces. The Afghan Public Protection Force, which the Chairman mentioned, is a force that will be under the control of the Ministry of Interior. As the Chairman stated, this is a result of a decree from President Karzai saying that private security contractors who provide protection to fixed sites, development projects, and convoys will transition to Afghanistan lead under the Afghan Protection Force. That will happen for private companies, non-governmental organizations, and other non-military activities this year, and it will happen for military activities in March of 2013, a year from now. To help build this force, ISAF has set up an advisory group which will partner with the Public Protection Force and the Ministry of Interior to develop and train the force. That action is ongoing today in order to have it stood up and ready next month in March of 2012. We are also actively looking at ways to improve the Ministry of Interior's ability to oversee the Public Protection Force and the remaining private security contractors that will continue to protect diplomatic activities in Afghanistan. Vetting is very difficult in a country such as Afghanistan, which lacks much of the infrastructure and information systems that we have here. So our vetting process includes use of Afghan traditional methods, such as having village elders provide recommendations on potential recruits, as well as more modern procedures such as the biometrics that Mr. Motzek mentioned, drug testing, and criminal background checks. In closing, I want to emphasize that we at the Department of Defense take the death or injury of every U.S. personnel in Afghanistan or elsewhere very seriously. The security of our troops and the success of our mission are our top priority. No system is perfect, but no system, as Mr. Motzek said, is static. We are continually looking at this, and we appreciate the opportunity in this hearing to have your ideas, Mr. Chairman, and those of your colleagues on how we can do a better job. Thank you.
Thank you. As I said in my opening statement, going forward, the screening and vetting process must overcome the shortcomings detailed in the AR-15-6 and the other reviews done following the attack at FOB Frontenac. What corrective actions were taken after the attack at FOB Frontenac, and how will those actions and others mitigate the risks inherent in the new screening process?
Chairman, I'll take that question, and maybe some of my colleagues will have some additional comment. There were a number of orders produced after that attack. There was an AAR, just like we always do. Mr. said we're a learning organization. So we did an after-action review in addition to these investigations. Came up with a list of things that we could do better, and fragmentary orders, supplemental orders went out to the force to do that. Some of those things specifically related to some of the weaknesses that were identified in this investigation and a couple of others. Specifically, the need for the private security companies to adhere to the same vetting process that we're using with the Afghan National Security Forces. A couple others that I think were very important were, and Mr. Motzek mentioned this in his opening statement, that we've added a requirement for weekly screening. So they're not just now screened when they first enter service, but there's a requirement for the commanders on the FOBs to screen all local nationals that come on and off the FOB on a random basis, at least weekly. That's done through biometrics, so that if something new information emerges, there's a chance that they'll catch that if it wasn't caught when they initially entered service. A couple other points were made about increasing force protection awareness for our soldiers themselves and their leaders. I'll let General Dahl comment on.
Let me just ask one question that goes along. Shia Ahmed had gone through the screening, but he had used a little bit different name each time. And how do you measure that against the biometrics? How do you pick that up?
Yes, sir. The biometrics, a guy may report in with more than one name, which is not uncommon in Afghanistan, because frequently they have one name and they don't know how to spell it, and it's not clear to us sometimes how to spell it exactly, so it might even be spelled the guy only has one set of fingerprints. He's only got one facial photograph. He's only got one iris scan. So it doesn't matter how many names are entered into the biometrics. We're going to know who he is, and we're going to be able to associate.
So using the different names, or he could have done that, like say, unintentionally.
That's right. That's right.
But
which is not uncommon there.
But the name isn't the important thing. It's the biometrics, how they.
That's exactly right. And I'll ask General Dahl to speak a little bit more about the lessons learned that were applied in Regional Command South.
Yes, Chairman. As you saw in the report, we made a number of recommendations as a result of the 15-6 to our higher headquarters to be incorporated more broadly, theater-wide, and across the force, not just in the Army, and also for training. But specifically in Regional Command South, immediately following the approval of the investigating officer's findings and recommendations, in Regional Command South, where we had the authority to implement changes ourselves, we put several things into place. Our first intention was to close the gap between having people, Afghans employed on our FOBs, that had not been screened. So we set out to put in an order to our subordinate task forces and formations to immediately enroll and screen as rapidly as possible all those who are working on those FOBs, so we could control that piece. The second, sir, was that in a sustainment endeavor, once they were enrolled, we wanted to conduct monthly. 50% of those working on that FOB would be continually screened at random, 50% against the current watch list, so that if information had entered the watch list since they had been vetted initially, there was an opportunity to pick up on that. And it wasn't practical to do 100% weekly or monthly, but we chose 50% monthly at random against the current watch list so that we would have some sustainment mechanism to pick up on new information that would enter. And then finally, sir, we conducted training. And this was training of our contracting officer representatives, those young officers, in some cases non-commissioned officers, who are responsible for the oversight of the local contract in that area, making sure that they were more familiar with their responsibilities, more familiar with the policies and the procedures that the investigation officer had determined were confusing. I will add, sir, that I'm now back at Fort Drum. We still have soldiers who are downrange, and we're preparing others to go. And I've seen some of this incorporated into some of our pre-deployment training, as well. But again, I can only speak locally in that regard for Fort Drum and RC South and 10th Mountain Division.
Thank you. General Townsend, why do we need to have Afghan personnel guarding U.S. and coalition bases and soldiers? What are the implications of having U.S. personnel perform these security missions?
Well, sir, as Mr. Motzik mentioned in his opening statement, this is not a new phenomenon. Our use of contracted security guards goes back a long way in our history, into the 1800s and even before. And one of the reasons we do that is it reduces the burden on our soldiers and allows them to focus. We never have enough soldiers. It reduces the burden on the soldiers and allows them to focus on the primary tasks that they have to do. As Mr. Motzik said, it's the offensive operations and the complex counterinsurgency tasks that we need them to do. So if they're guarding convoys or development projects or fixed sites or even standing watch on a perimeter, then they're not able to engage in those higher and more complex tasks. That's one of the main reasons that we do it, probably the most significant reason that we do it. Sir.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yes, sir. If I could just add, there's always a misperception that we're using security guards everywhere. The use of security guards is condition-based. It doesn't relieve the commander in the field for making the determination that this particular location, the threat is a more of a military threat as opposed to a criminal threat, and therefore I choose not to use security contractors or eventually the APPF to provide this security. The commander is not relieved of that responsibility. And so just because we have an installation or just because we have a convoy, that doesn't necessarily mean we default automatically to a contractor-based solution set. In my opening statement, I mentioned the 20,000 personnel would have to be diverted to this function. But I would also ask, and the committee is painfully aware of this, that we have a rotational base that we have to use to provide support downrange. And so generally speaking, the rule of thumb is for every job you have downrange, there's 2 more in the rear, one who's returned and one's getting ready to go. So for the 20,000 personnel I was talking about that we presently use in Afghanistan to provide this security process, we'd be talking up to 60,000 people in the force, the military force, that would have to be aligned to perform that function.
Thank you. Ranking Member Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, just a question in terms of security guards are certainly part of the problem, but we also we train the ANSF, we train with them, and we fight alongside them. Of the incidents where they have attacked our troops, I don't know if you know the numbers, how many have been security guard situations where it's people who have been supposedly protecting compounds or protecting areas, and how many of them have been ANSF forces that we're fighting alongside or training with? Do you happen to know off the top of your head what the breakdown is on that?
It's three of the cases are involving private security forces. The rest of them are Afghan National Police or Afghan National Army soldiers.
Got it. So that seems to be the bulk of the problem in the area. And I guess the big question I have is, so you go through the initial screening process, and obviously it's not perfect. We don't have a 100% database on every Afghan national who is signing up to be part of the ANSF or part of these contracting forces, but you do your best you can. But once they get in there, if there is a concern, a problem, and as you've gone through these cases, I guess 2 questions. And number one, have you gone back and found signs in most of those cases where after the fact, some of our, soldiers or Marines have come forward and said, well, look, the guy was saying this and doing this. We knew he was squirrely for a long time. We were worried about him. So have you discovered that? And second, if you do discover that kind of thing now, what are your options and what do you do? How do you respond? Do you take this person out of the unit? How do you respond to those sort of, threats as they become perceived before they actually turn into an attack?
Thank you, sir. The short answer to your first question is yes, we have seen signs after the fact. Not in all cases. We do a pretty deliberate post-mortem, the investigations, the AARs, and they sometimes result in soldiers saying, we saw signs. Afghan soldiers will say it, our soldiers will say it sometimes. In other cases, there is no hint from any witness that there was any trouble with this soldier. So once there are signs identified, if someone steps forward and provides those, then the commander there, the contractors and the commanders can make decisions to remove that individual from the force. Well, let's talk about the ANSF in particular. I was at a FOB in Gardez, Afghanistan, where one day the Afghan intelligence officer came in and briefed the commander that there was a soldier he was concerned about. And he didn't really have good information. It wasn't really all that substantial, but the Afghan commander looked at me and says, he's off this FOB today. And he had him transferred away just to remove the potential source of the problem. So that's one example of Afghan taking a decision.
And as you've investigated this and learned more about how these incidents happen, have you taken steps in terms of training our troops to, okay, look for this, report it? I mean, have we upped the awareness in some way, and if so, how?
Yes, sir. Your question speaks precisely to conducting the after-action report, conducting the lessons learned, and extracting those signals that we weren't attending to previously. And post-mortem, when you're conducting these investigations and the soldiers or the Afghans come forward and say, well, in hindsight, now it's clear to me, that maybe we should have paid more attention to this. Those are precisely the pieces of information that are incorporated into training and it's spread widely across the formation so that each soldier, each Afghan is now attentive to those indicators that weren't there before. So we did incorporate those in Regional Command South locally, and now those are also things that I'm seeing in our pre-deployment training for the formations that we're sending in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Also for Mr. and Mrs. Acosta, our sympathy with you. I am father of 4 sons serving in the military, 2 who were in combat in Iraq. And so I particularly have a great sympathy and identification. And I know, too, that our chairman has been deeply affected by your loss. At this time, General Townsend, I was very grateful. My former National Guard unit, the 218th Brigade of the South Carolina Army National Guard, served in Afghanistan 07-08, led by General Bob Livingston, who has subsequently been elected the only elected Adjutant General in the United States. But when I went to visit them, because I went every 3 months, I was so proud of their service and concerned. But it was amazing to me. I thought the 1,600 troops, the largest deployment from our state since World War II, would be concentrated at Camp Phoenix, and that the training would be a rotation through the camp. But to my surprise, our troops were at FOBs and military personnel all across the country. As it turned out, it was, again, such a positive experience. The net of this was that our personnel felt like they were working with Afghan brothers. So we know that there can be incidences such as this, and I'm just hoping that the persons that I've worked with that in the future, that we are vetting the other persons, the Afghan security forces who are serving. As we vet, is there any polygraph capability, or is that used if there's some suspicion of someone being a threat to our troops?
Sir, there is a polygraph capability in theater. However, it is rarely used for this type of thing. It's a very complex procedure. We rarely employ it in our own security forces here for particular jobs. It's complex and just hard to do on a large scale. So I would imagine that polygraph capability could be used in a particular investigation, but we don't typically use it in screening folks for employment, sir.
And I would hope, though, that if a person has been identified as indicating a desire to kill Americans, that might raise itself to where polygraph could be used. And with the advances in technology today, I certainly hope that in whatever biometric records there are, that that could be considered. What is the military standard that's used by personnel to enter unfavorable data about Afghan nationals?
There's a couple of venues for that. The first, we'll just take Afghan soldiers and police, for example. The first would be with their chain of command through the Afghan system. The Afghans also have a biometric system that we're helping them build and stand up, and we have our own biometric system. And that biometric watch list is really a master database of all of our partners, and all of our known and suspected enemies also are in that database. They're entered into that with their name, and as I spoke about earlier, some of their biological data, identification data is entered into that. There's actually a questionnaire that you fill out, you know, address, where you're from, parents' names, all that kind of stuff is entered in there, and that's probably the best place to put it. That's the watch list that you hear us refer to. So if the information's entered into that and uploaded in the database, then all U.S. forces in theater will have access to that information.
And that's very encouraging. And indeed, with the technologies we have today, things that would have been unimaginable can be done. So I appreciate that positive response. I also want to know what recourse do U.S. commanders have if they're unsatisfied with the Afghan Police Protection Force, which has been supplied to a base?
So the commanders have complete authority and freedom to secure their unit in any way they see fit. And so if they're at any time unsatisfied with any aspect of the security, they're authorized to take whatever measure they need to take to ensure the security of their unit.
And so it could be reported that this either an individual or maybe a whole unit could be replaced?
Yes, sir. And in fact, General Dahl can probably speak more about it. In the specific instance at FOB Frontenac, there was a new unit that had arrived, and there was, in his contractor chain, the perpetrator was identified to be fired, but in the U.S. military chain, those facts weren't quite as clear. That was a disconnect that we've sought to try to correct.
General, thank you. I'd like to get your point, too.
Yes, sir. 2 points. To readdress your earlier question, you're looking for what is the threshold or the standard that would require an entry to be made on the watch list. And clearly, we did not have a defined standard to help our contracting officer representatives at the time, which caused some confusion. And a lot of that is left to the judgment, of the individual, which is why you have to. We know we have to select the right individual who has the maturity and the training and the expertise to exercise that judgment, and we have to train them. Those are some of the powerful lessons we learned from this case, that we have incorporated. To your second question, the local commander has the authority to remove anyone from his FOB, from his operating base. The contractor has the authority to fire, but whether the contractor fires or not, the commander has the authority to remove those people from his base. And then lastly, sir, just to reiterate a comment that was made earlier, I don't want to give any impression that military commanders are absolving any responsibility for the security of their soldiers. These personal security contractors that are hired are integrated into that security plan, and they're placed in those places where they can perform that function, and we save our very highly trained, well-equipped, combat experienced soldiers for the larger task.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first add my condolences to Mr. and Ms. Acosta. Is there, and maybe just a yes or no answer from all four of you, is there a fail-safe system that we could institute that would give us any kind of a guarantee?
Yes, sir, there is a fail-safe system, and I'll let my fellow witnesses reply, and I can then explain it a little bit.
Okay. Who?
Okay, sir. So the fail-safe system that you're referring to, and we've kind of talked about it here a little bit, is the commander is ultimately responsible for his unit security, as are the individual troopers. And so that fail-safe system that's out there, and it's a technique that's employed, is to make sure you post a guard for yourself, and that's always the option to these soldiers. And they can always post a guard to overwatch what they're doing if at any time they feel the threat warrants it. Also, there's a technique that's referred to as a guardian angel, and that's I guess a good analogy would be sort of like a designated driver. The guardian angel is not there to participate in the activity that's being done. He's there to watch out for his buddies while they do that activity, whether it be a meeting or cleaning weapons or undergoing physical training. This guardian angel is prepared to fight, and he's in a position of advantage to overwatch that activity, and that's what he does. And sometimes that can be done in an unobtrusive way by introducing a person into a meeting who just sits and watches what's going on in the room and doesn't really participate in the meeting. So that's just an example of these fail-safes that are taught to our soldiers in training, and they're available to the commanders and any soldier.
Yes, General.
Yes, sir. If I could just, I'm not going to disagree with my buddy, but I interpreted your question a little bit differently. Just to add, we should aspire to develop and implement a fail-safe system, and that is precisely what we're doing, because we're going to meet our responsibilities to secure our formations. However, we have to remember that in combat environment, not everything turns out the way you expected, and you simply cannot anticipate everything. And unfortunate events happen. It's a very, very risky environment. So we're committed, to meet that challenge and to do everything we can. But we also have to recognize in that environment we just don't control everything.
But if I heard you correctly, this fail-safe system, as much as we can do it, I just want to remind everybody, we had a horrible attack at Host right on the border with Pakistan, where we lost a number of CIA personnel. But what you're saying is that the fail-safe system still requires our military being involved, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And of course they are. And in fact, I didn't mean to imply earlier that, and I thank General Dahl for pointing out that, there's no, I guess it's probably improper to say there's a fail-safe system because no system's perfect.
Right.
So this is a thinking enemy that we're dealing with here, a cunning enemy who wants to hurt us. And every now and then, the enemy's going to have some success. So what we're trying to do is eliminate as much as possible, reduce the possibility that can happen, but we can't eliminate it completely. I didn't mean to imply in any of our statements so far that U.S. forces don't pull security for themselves. They do. In fact, again, it's up to the local commander. So there are places where the commanders have made risk assessments that it's appropriate for either local security contractors or Afghan security forces to secure that area. In other places, they deem that it's more appropriate that we do it together, and in other places, it's very appropriate that we do it ourselves.
If I can just interrupt you because I want to get this other point in, do we currently have any backlogs in the system for anyone that wants to know the potential for somebody being a threat? Are there any backlogs, or are we up to date on any inquiries of the system?
Sir, I think I understand your question. There's actually, it's almost instantaneous if someone wants to check the watch list. There are some physical limitations to the system. For example, if I've gone out and enrolled some folks in biometrics, I actually have to go upload it into the master database, and that takes time, takes resources, and sometimes I got to have a good signal, good bandwidth to get my upload out. But so there's some physical limitations that might be a delay, but we're talking here a matter of hours or days, not a significant backlog to enter data into the database and check the master watch list.
So you bring up an excellent point because technology helps us do this. And as General Townsend said, you're managing a bunch of different databases and linking them consistently, but you're all keyed to that piece of equipment downrange, which has had limited availability, to be blunt about it. They break, and we have challenges. In light of that, again, trying to improve what we do and recognize what we've learned. Next month, the Army, for example, will be deploying for the first time, and hopefully we will be deploying in large numbers later this year, a biometric device that is much more simple to operate. It's based on a smartphone technology as opposed to the larger packages that you've seen previous to this, and we can be much more free in the distribution of those downrange. So instead of having the existing chains of people providing access, we now give one to the contracting officer representative, him or herself, as opposed to having to go to an intelligence specialist or someone else at the installation. And that input now becomes multiplied as we proliferate the systems downrange.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also Mr. Acosta, our condolences as well. 58% of these incidences were not related to the enemy we faced necessarily, but just appear to be personnel disputes with between the Afghans and I guess somebody, either the Americans or someone else. The process of maintaining how those disputes are going on, and can you talk to us a little bit about how units are trained to watch for these kind of, for lack of a better place, workplace kind of incidences where somebody gets assaulted or they don't get the job they thought they were going to get, and how do we watch for that? And then much of that is intuitive, based on you were there, you understood what the fight was going on. How do we hand off in unit rotations the information about the people who are left there that might be subject to some sort of a workplace issue that could develop into an armed response, so to speak?
Sir, if it's all right, I'll take the question about, how do we manage the frictions, and I'll ask General Dahl to maybe address the question about battle handover of the information. On your question about the personal reasons, there are a number of personal reasons that cause this this kind of conflict to occur. As you pointed out a couple of them yourself. One of them is just simple insults. Another one is combat stress that the individuals are under. Cultural misunderstandings. I kind of talked about that in my opening remarks. Those are some of the examples. Religious and ideological frictions, where I watch you do some activity and I perceive it in one way based on my religion or ideology. So these are all some of the reasons that go into the personal motivations that these Afghans, when they act out.
Looking at the 26 incidents that have happened so far that related to that, do we analyze, kind of what categories those fall into, and can we learn anything from it?
Yes, sir. In fact, we do. And where we can identify that there are personal motivations, sometimes they're not discernible. Where we can discern those, you can categorize those, as I just described some of the categories. Some of the things we can learn from it, first of all, and I kind of mentioned this in my opening remarks, is the importance of cultural training that all U.S. service members undergo before they deploy. And in fact, General Karimi, the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of Afghanistan, has directed that his soldiers will start undergoing cultural training as well, so they understand a little bit. That's not something we've attended to in the past, making sure Afghans know how to deal with us, as their partners. We've been training our side of that equation for a long time. The other one is our own conduct. Making sure that our own soldiers comport themselves the way we'd expect U.S. soldiers to do that. And I'll ask General Dahl if he can talk about maybe the transfer of that information about people.
Congressman, two points. One, we get at this, one is training, and the other one is leader involvement or leader overwatch. And what we've done in Afghanistan in particular to get after this is to insert greater attention to the training and leader oversight during what we call RSOI, the receiving and the staging and the onward integration of forces. So when they arrive into Afghanistan, there is additional attention paid towards the cultural situation in that specific location, because there are cultural differences as you go from district to district, province to province. So we'll address those so that the soldier is aware and sensitive to cultural differences that could be a problem. And then also the awareness, but also the involvement of the leadership in that training and in the overwatch is important.
Is there specifically in the checklist of handoff from one unit, this issue about here are the 5 individuals we've had some sort of a dust up with. We don't know if it's going to result in anything, but I'm watching them. You should as well. Is there a formal kind of a handoff of that issue specifically between commanders?
Sir, at the unit level, the commander to commander and his non-commissioned officer, first sergeant or command sergeant major, will identify who are the strong soldiers and who are the weak soldiers. And I think that applies not only to our own formations but to our partners as well.
Okay, you said you think that applies, though, but is it institutionalized so that we do in fact get some attention paid to this issue, since 26% of these incidents occurred not from guys who supported the Taliban or supported Al-Qaeda, but are actually just got mad at us for their own reasons?
I understand, sir. I can't say that it has been institutionalized across the Army.
Sir, you make a great point here, and as General Dawes pointed out, it's something that a lot of units are doing, but you're asking, is everyone required to do it?
Right.
I can't answer that affirmatively right now, but I've written that down. We'll take that back. And if it's not, it's an easy add to the orders that I talked about earlier. But, is this on the relief in place battle handover checklist that there's a specific point in that relief in place where the outgoing commander and the incoming commander talk about potential insider threats and people that have been identified as being suspicious? We'll check on that. If we can get you an answer on that before the end of the hearing, we will. But I've written it down to follow up.
Thank you, Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing on this matter that is critical to the safety and security of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. I want to also give my personal condolences to the Acostas for the sacrifice that you have made in the sacrifice that your son made on behalf of this country. And isn't it comforting to know that that sacrifice was made for the security of a country that you can now come to and petition the civilian authorities to look at the circumstances that led to your son's sacrifice. You have that ability here in the United States, and that's what your son gave his life for. And for that, we will appreciate him, and we appreciate you for taking your time and resources to petition your government to take a look at these circumstances to see whether or not there is something that can prevent another family from having to go through what you have had to go through as a result of the same circumstances that resulted in your son's sacrifice. So I want to thank you all for being here. I also want to thank General Townsend and the rest of the folks on the panel today for being here to testify. I cite General Townsend since he's a Georgia native. He's my homeboy. So welcome, sir. I do have a question. Can you define, General Townsend, what success is in Afghanistan? What would be our success? And also I'd like to know from Mr. Sedney whether or not we're on course to remove all of our forces from Afghanistan by the end of 2014.
Sir, that question you just asked me is pretty high up, on the pay scale for me to answer, but I'll just look at our national objectives in Afghanistan as I understand them. First of all, is to ensure that Afghanistan never again becomes a safe haven for transnational, specifically Al-Qaeda, but other transnational terrorists that might threaten our country. That's job one on the success list. Secondly, is to, I think to do that, we've determined that what we want to do is establish a credible enough Afghan state and security force that they can secure themselves and we don't have to stay there forever to make sure it's not a safe haven. So, sir, those are my definitions of success, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Sedney to talk about progress.
I would also add a comment. The fact that the Afghans, seem to not want us to be there does not mean that they're not interested in protecting their country from outside influence, aka Al-Qaeda or some other terrorist group that seeks to use the country as a base. Is that correct?
Sir, I would maybe express a little exception to your point of they don't want us there. I met a lot of Afghans in my 3 tours there, and there are a lot of Afghans that want us to be there and help them help themselves. There are certainly a number that don't. But your point is exactly right, and I would agree that just because even those that don't want us there don't necessarily want Afghanistan to be a haven for international terrorists.
Well, your clarification is well taken. Mr. Sedney.
Thank you, Congressman, and I will certainly fully associate myself with General Townsend's point that we, and your point is accurate as well, we and the Afghans share a goal of having Afghanistan being responsible for its own security. Afghans don't want their country to be used to attack other countries, with the small exception of those that support the Taliban, which is a very small amount. You asked if we are on track towards that goal, and I would say yes, we are. As the President stated in his remarks in June when he announced that we would be withdrawing 10,000 troops by the end of this year, and we have by the end of last year, and we did remove those 10,000 troops. We are on track towards achieving our goal of having an Afghanistan that is capable of defending itself from the threat of terrorism and from the possibility of safe havens. To do that, there's both a lot of fighting that needs to be done and a lot of training, advising, and assisting the Afghan security forces, because it's building the Afghan security forces through the partnership with them that's going to enable that is enabling that transition to take place. And already, as I said, almost 50% of the country, of the population of the country, is in areas that are transitioning. The Afghans, as General Townsend said, do appreciate the advice and support and assistance that we're giving them, and I would say particularly in the military. I have met, from the top of the Afghan military to the ordinary fighting Afghan, innumerable Afghans who express their appreciation for us. I've heard from Minister Wardak and from Afghan generals repeatedly that they appreciate, but that they are also, to be frank, embarrassed by the fact that other countries have to come and do their fighting for them. They want to do their fighting on their own. We want to enable that. So we are on course to do that. That will enable us to transition to Afghan security lead. There will be, of course, as the Secretary of Defense has said, a continuing need to train, advise, and assist the Afghan military after 2014, after that transition to their lead.
All right, thank you. And I'm out of time. If I had more time, I would ask whether the screening process currently used by the Afghan National Security Forces to vet recruits to the Afghan Public Protection Force, whether or not it's adequate and practical, but perhaps someone else will ask that question.
Gentleman's time has expired. Will you please take that question for the record? Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, ma'am, I'm sorry about your loss, and I want to thank you for coming today. I think it elevates the importance of the meeting and reinforces our need to fix the issues over there so that this doesn't happen again. General Townsend, you mentioned that many times some of the Afghans who are applying for these positions cannot spell their name. One of the things that I was taken back by when I was in Afghanistan, we were at a NATO police training facility, is the extreme lack of education. And taking a man or a woman who can't spell their name or couldn't read a book of the level of the Cat in the Hat, if you will, and handing that person an AK-47 and expecting them to carry out security related details. And my question gets back to in these events that we've seen where we've had these tragedies, is the lack of education a common denominator, or are the attacks carried out by people Afghans who may very well be better educated? Is the education level, has that been a common denominator in the people who have carried out the attacks?
I'll ask for General Dahl's help a little bit on the education piece. I haven't seen any data that associates level of education. I know that we've seen attacks by those who are illiterate, as well as attacks by those who are highly educated. I don't know, I haven't seen the trend, and so I can't talk to that. Maybe General Dahl can. I will say that your point about education and literacy is a very important one, and it's something that we're tackling very explicitly. The NTMA, NATO Training Mission Afghanistan, has a very strong literacy program. GIROA has a strong literacy program. It's probably one of the most important social developments, I think, in all of Afghanistan. Is there's a very focused program to teach Afghan soldiers and policemen how to read. Right now, about half of the Afghan Army has been exposed to reading between a first and a third grade level. It's been that target has been ratcheting up, but the goal is that all Afghan service members in the police or the Army, during their term of their enlistment, their first enlistment, learn how to read. And I think this has implications for the country that go far beyond a higher quality security force when they go back to their villages and are able to read after their term in service. General Dahl, can you help me about education?
Sir. Congressman, thank you for the question. I would just add that, and you are right, I was in the South, and in the South illiteracy is particularly high. I learned in my time over there that the lack of education, the lack of ability to read or write or add or subtract did not necessarily limit someone from performing a particular function or achieving a capability, but it severely challenges our efforts to train them. And we've learned a lot of lessons about how to go about that in a way where we're communicating more effectively. It takes a little bit longer. You have to start at a very, very base level, but I guess we're learning just because someone can't read and write doesn't mean they're not capable. It just means you have to go about it a little bit differently. So I'm not that concerned about that long run. I would add that the training program, the literacy program that's part of the development of the ANSF forces is very, very good. It's possible that in the future that cadre of ANSF becomes some of the most literate people, at least in the South. I can say that would be true. And I'll leave it at that.
I guess my question, and I'll end with this and allow this process to move on. It seems to me that somebody who is less educated would be more susceptible to the rhetoric, if you will, and to be led down the path of carrying out an attack or some type of terrorist attack by some other type of what they might refer to as a religious leader. But thank you, gentlemen.
Congressman, on that, you've asked an excellent question, and we will go back and see if there is a connection between literacy, illiteracy, and training in the carrying out of those attacks. I don't think we've been asking that question, and based on your input, we will do that. Thank you.
Sir, if I may add one more thing with regards to the security contractors, the reliability of the educated contractor is significantly greater. One of the reasons why we had a fracture early on between the police force and the security contractors is that the very good security companies recognized very early if they offered education to their employees, they would have a better and more reliable employee. Something as fundamental as to be able to count the money you are paid on a given day is extraordinarily important. When you give a person that capability, you've changed something. Several months ago when I was in country, I saw a gate guard that I'd seen before. He ran up to me and he literally handed me his AK-47. He handed it to me because he read the serial number off the side of it to me. He was incapable of doing that before. So I would argue that it's not a question of reliability so much as competency. You have a more competent individual if we follow the path that you've described.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you. Last year when I was in Afghanistan meeting with General Caldwell, he pointed out that vast majority of the country are illiterate, and the problem that they had of teaching a sergeant trying to teach them how to fire a weapon. When he says put 4 cartridges in, they didn't know what 4 was. But he told us at that time that the 70,000 they had recruited that year, most of them had gotten through that training up to the 3rd grade, and vast improvement. And I think that will have long-lasting effects for the country, too. They felt very good about the fact that they were getting education, and as has been stated, they felt good about that. Mr. Kissel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the family, thank you for being here today. We lost a young man in 2010 in Iraq in a very similar situation. It's most troublesome, and our condolences and prayers are with you. Thank the gentleman for being here today. General Townsend, a lot has been said about biometrics and what happens when the machines don't work. I read somewhere that there seemed to be a failure and not enough machines throughout the country. What happens when the machines don't work?
That's a great point, sir, and thanks for that question. You know, the biometrics are just one piece of a complex and layered system that I talked about in my opening remarks. There's actually 4 levels to this: prevent, educate, train, and protect. Those are the 4 levels. The biometrics comes into the prevent piece. That prevent piece is largely based on the 8-step vetting process. 1 step of that vetting process is biometrics. And then you've heard testimony here that we're continuing now with weekly screening.
In general, if the, and I apologize for interrupting, I do want to follow along this path just a second. If there was not a machine working in 1 step for biometrics checks could not be made, would that be enough to at least pause somebody being into the process? So you would not say, okay, we don't have this today, but we'll go ahead and bring him in anyway.
And that's a great point, and that's actually one of the, I think, the outcomes of the investigation from the FOB Frontenac incident. And Mr. Motzik can talk about, I think, here in a second, the arming process for security contractors. But no, the process stops when a person can't be biometrically enrolled into the watch list. His forward movement through the induction process stops. And if you would talk about arming.
Right there. As General Townsend said, it's got to be multi-layered. And if you follow the procedures correctly, you have the biometric process, and indeed you have 2 biometric processes now. You have the U.S. biometric process, and you have an Afghan biometric process that are complementary. So you've got that. But the same process, you have an arming requirement as well. The Afghan Ministry of Interior is the one who provides you your arming authority from the Afghan government, and we should have the same corollary, and we have the same processes in place where we provide an arming authority as well. And in this particular instance, as you recall in the investigation, the local commander thought he had a window because this person had been previously employed and the like. He thought he had a window. My position as the DOD guy is that window does not exist. You are proper in your assessment that if you cannot properly biometrically enroll someone, if you cannot properly license them to be armed, because that infers training and knowledge on certain rules, that the process has to stop, and then you.
How complete is the biometric database from all people that are inputting and checking? How free of stovepiping is this information? Is it broad so that various inputs? There's not, say, one department, one country, one unit that's not included or does not have access across the board.
There is an Afghan database, and there's a U.S. database, and we share information. You might understand why we would have a separate database from the Afghans, but by and large, there's not that much difference. But we share information, so there's a deliberate effort to prevent the stovepiping, sort that you're talking about.
Once someone is vetted and once they have been brought in, and I know you talk about the weekly checks, but how difficult would it be, for example, if someone was, say, looked like, if they were Taliban, they look like somebody who's been vetted, how difficult would it be for somebody else to come on base and assume the identification of somebody who has been vetted? Do we reach a comfort level? Do we have daily checks? How difficult would it be for me to come on base looking like somebody else and have access to be able to do harm?
Yeah, sir, I can say, just to refer to my comments earlier, I know one of the things we did immediately afterwards was to ensure everyone, all of our contractors, not just the personal security contractors, but all of the Afghan contractors on our bases were enrolled and vetted. But then on a sustainment basis, we went with 50% on a monthly basis randomly. That is a case where we would pick up on someone like that. But it's not perfect. We wouldn't pick up on them perhaps the day that they walked on and were impersonating someone else, if that's what you're alluding to. But and really, it's a material solution. It's how much time and how much equipment do you have to dedicate to this. So again, we want to aspire to the perfect solution, given the limitations that we have, and those are the measures that we've taken.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have some other questions that I will forward for outside follow-up.
Thank you. Mrs. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, panel, and most of all, thank you for coming today, for your service and your sacrifice. Our prayers are with you and the nation's gratitude. So thank you. Thank you. Regarding the incident, I want to kind of hone in on that a little bit. And it looks like that, first of all, the Tundra employees did an investigation and let this person go. But that recommendation was never incorporated into the Tundra personnel records. And then subsequently, the U.S. investigated also into the allegations, but they couldn't substantiate the credibility of the statements, so the officer decided not to enter this information in. I'd like to know, since this happened, what change of procedures has there been, first of all, in U.S. policy as it relates to investigations of this kind? If they determine that somebody is unsubstantiated, then what is the process? Has that been changed, or are they required now to enter that, or?
Ma'am, I'll start by, and then I'll hand it off. You're correct that your read of the investigation is exactly correct. We had two different judgments that were made, one by the Tundra contractor, one by the officer who was responsible. And it speaks to the question that was raised earlier as to what is the threshold that would require a mandatory entry in there. I know that what we did afterwards locally, was to essentially raise that threshold, raise any suspicion, that would cause an entry to be made and that person to be removed. And this is partly explains why post the attack at FOB Frontenac, when we went and did that vetting of all the employees there, that some additional ones were removed. I'll ask my colleagues if they could talk about how we've institutionalized that, beyond my experience.
I think it was Ranking Member Smith who said earlier that we need to intercede earlier if it's unclear, err on the side of safety, which I think is it kind of sums up what we're talking about here. But in the end, these are judgments by leaders and commanders on the battlefield. So if someone brings an allegation to me, I'm going to hear it out and explore it, and I'm going to at some point, I'll make a decision that it's either substantiated and he's fired, or it's substantiated and he's fired and it's, or he's not fired, but it's put as a note in the watch list, or it's completely unfounded because this guy's got there's some conflict between the two of them, so the person who's giving me the allegation, it's just unfounded. And so I might make a decision not to enter it just because an allegation's been made. These leaders out there are making those judgment calls. So, but I think Mr. Smith's point about err on the side of safety for the U.S. Soldiers is a good rule to go by, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that changed was that, again, in the investigation, because it was unsubstantiated, the senior leadership of Tundra chose not to put it in the person's file. We now require them to put the investigation concluded it was unsubstantiated, so it's not a non-response. It's not a non-placement. You have to make an affirmative decision and record that affirmative decision now.
I'm glad to hear that.
Can I add, one of my assistants here just handed me a note. It says actually the U.S. 4A order requires an entry to any incident that may pose a threat to U.S. personnel, such as threats, if the person makes a threat or has a negligent discharge with their weapon. But again, there's going to be some line there where it's a commander's call. Is that really a threat or is that not? And that's what we're talking about.
I'm a little confused by what you just said. I thought you just said that it's procedure that it is entered, but then you say it's up to the commander's call. So is it or isn't it?
Yeah, such things such as obvious things such as threats. So if I make a threat against an American force, they're required to enter. But if someone says, so-and-so, I heard so-and-so make a threat to an American force, there's going to be a commander who's going to investigate that, and he's going to make a decision. Okay, I don't think that's credible. Is it credible or is it not credible? If I know that he threatened Americans, that's very credible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, ma'am, just to tie it back to the investigation also, the officer who did not enter that in there determined that the threat was unsubstantiated. So he was not required to make an entry at the time. In his judgment, Had he made the judgment that it was just a substantiated threat, he would have made the entry. Now it's a requirement to make that entry, but still there's a judgment that has to be exercised as to whether or not this is a credible threat, or if this is just someone it's a family dispute and they're trying to cause problems for one another.
So you say he does have to enter it, though, even if he doesn't let him go, he does enter it.
Yes, ma'am. The policy requires the entry be made if the judgment is made that he is a threat.
Gotcha. I think that's good. It needs to be in there, even if it's unsubstantiated. People need to know. And I want to follow up on your earlier anecdotal story about the Afghan security officer. General, you said that they came in and there was a soldier and they had some concerns about them, so they let him go and moved him out of that. What was done with him? Besides just letting him go, I'm a little concerned he might go to another FOB and do the same thing.
In the case that I was referring to, that soldier had a personal conflict. We reportedly had a personal conflict with a specific American soldier, not that they had a problem with all Americans, but there was a personal insult that was perceived by this Afghan soldier, and so the Afghan commander made a decision to move him away to a different location and remove him from that conflict. At the time, I thought that was an appropriate decision made by an Afghan leader dealing with an Afghan soldier.
But hopefully note that conflict in his record that went with him. Yes?
I don't know about that at the time, man. This is about a year and a half ago, and even at that time, all of our Afghan security forces weren't yet entered into biometrics. So, yeah.
I appreciate it. I just think we need to err on the side of caution and have a valid record that goes with people so that in the future people know past instances to avoid any potential future negative incident. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Platts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your holding this important hearing. Certainly appreciate all the witnesses' testimony and focus on this important issue. I want to add my words of personal sympathy and gratitude to the families who have lost loved ones. We can often take for granted the freedoms we have, and the truth is we only have the blessings and freedoms we do as Americans because of heroic selflessness of our men and women in uniform who are willing to go into harm's way and give their lives in service to this nation. So we certainly have you in our prayers and our gratitude for you giving your loved ones for all of us. General Towson, if you could comment, and I recognize we're in an open setting here, not a classified setting, but earlier today, Reuters reported the following. Quote, the United States military said in a secret report that the Taliban, backed by Pakistan, are set to retake control of Afghanistan after NATO-led forces withdraw, raising the prospect of a major failure of Western policy after a costly war, unquote. Again, knowing we're in an open setting, are you able to comment at all on the existence of this report or the general characterization about the Taliban retaking control, anything in your knowledge that would relate to what's being reported today by Reuters?
I can comment a bit about it, but as you said, not much because the classified nature of the report. The truth is I'm aware of the existence of the report. I've received a copy of it, but I haven't read it and digested it myself. What I do know is the report is taken from interrogations of Taliban prisoners. And so these guys you got to keep it in context. The folks that are quoted in this report are some of the most ideologically committed folks on the enemy side. So I don't think they're representative, one, of the Taliban as a whole, nor are they representative of the Afghan people. I think that's probably best I know off a quick glance at the cover of the report. That's all I can say.
So based on your knowledge and what we can talk about here in an open setting, it's the report isn't a finding of our own intelligence gathering out there on the street, in essence, but more those who we've captured who are in a defiant manner saying this is what's going to happen, and so the credibility of the basis of that report needs to be maybe closely scrutinized.
I don't want to attack the report because I haven't read it, but I just want to keep it in context that that's the reports are coming from enemy soldiers held in captivity.
Yeah, and, maybe say the credibility of the source or the basis of the report, not the report itself.
Yes, sir.
So. Okay. Thank you, and again, appreciate all of our witnesses for your service to our nation, and we're grateful for what you do. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for being here today. I appreciate the testimony that you've given, the questions that have been asked. I believe we've received some of the answers that we've sought on how we can reduce the number of these attacks. The committee will continue to review and investigate these attacks and work with the DoD to constantly work on making improvement in this area with the DoD and with the Army. Thank you very much. This hearing then is adjourned.